Greetings, YouTube. Whenever people discuss racism online, and in particular racism in relationship to the Republican Party of 2016, there are three groups of people that will bring up one particular event. There are trolls, there are actual out-and-out racists, and then there are people who are simply ignorant of historical context. So this is what this video is about. And the title says it all. Lincoln was progressive for the 1860s. Now, in comparison to the 2016, he would be considered far more progressive than some people in our era, sadly, but he would still held a lot of beliefs on about a number of topics and social issues that would be viewed far more conservatively in our current contemporary era. But in the 1860s, he was progressive. Now, why am I couching it in those terms? Why am I framing it in that manner? I'm framing it in that manner because Lincoln was a member of the Republican Party. And the Republican Party of the 1860s was far more progressive than the Democratic Party of the 1860s. Now, I'm being very specific with my language here because the three groups of people I mentioned, the trolls, the racists, and the sincerely ignorant, will often say, well, the Republicans are the ones that freed the slaves. Well, yes. But in that era, they were the more progressive party. Not saying that they would be considered progressive by our standards in 2016, but in 1860, they were viewed and held views that were more progressive than the Democrats. Now, that was true for the most part up through the 1960s. But in the 1960s, during the Civil Rights Movement, things flipped. When a Democratic president endorsed the Civil Rights Movement, all of the hardcore racists of the Democratic Party left and moved to the Republican. And the party's polarity switched. So the Republican Party ceased to be the more progressive party and became the more conservative party, whereas the Democratic Party became the more progressive. So when people say Lincoln freed the slaves and the Republicans freed the slaves, they are historically accurate. They are not lying. But they are being disingenuous by making the assumption or the inference or implying that the Republican Party of 2016 is more progressive than the Democratic Party of 2016, which of course is bullshit. The Republican Party of 2016 is the party of racism, of homophobia, of religious bigotry, of trans bigotry. They're anti-woman. Some of them are out and out fascists, and the rest are borderline fascists. They are the party of the 1% and the enemy of the common people. So when someone says, Republicans freed the slaves, they're not lying. But they're leaving a whole lot out. Intentionally, in some cases, the racists and the trolls, and the sincerely ignorant just aren't taking into account the historical context of the difference between the 1860s and 2016. The Republican Party of today is not the Republican Party of the latter part of the 19th century. It's been a really long time since the Republicans had even a whiff of progressive in their political policies. Nowadays, there are no progressive elements to the Republican Party. None. Even though if you were to take a Republican, even the most conservative, from 2016 and put him in the 1860s, he might come off as being somewhat more progressive, because all of our cultural standards have shifted to a certain degree. But some of those, I can tell you right now, some of those Republicans would fit right in, because they would really like us to return to the era when black people could be bought and sold like livestock, when women had no rights, where only people that had any power at all were white men. That's what they want, because they are foot soldiers at the minimum of the patriarchy, and some of them are officers. They really endorse the patriarchal structures of the world today, and they look back fondly to the era where the patriarchy had even more control than it has now. So historical context matters. Yes, Lincoln freed the slaves. Yes, the Republican Party freed the slaves. But the Republican Party of the 1860s is not the Republican Party of 2016. And don't let anyone tell you that it is, because that is nothing but out and out bullshit.